There we go. All right, so yeah, good morning again. My name is Ian Christensen. I'm the Senior Director of Private Sector Programs for the Secure World Foundation. Welcome to this morning's Policy Forum panel, where we are discussing the topic that was just at the end of Director Halamani's remarks, and that is U.S.-China space safety information sharing, exploring needs and possibilities. So the U.S. and China and their respective space ecosystems are certainly the two most prolific space actors today. We are currently seeing two Chinese large constellations, basically on the scale of Starlink, being currently deployed in China, and they're following that deployment schedule, which is a very rapid schedule. These two constellations are in addition to that diverse range of existing Chinese operators that Artie was mentioning. So we see a number of smaller quasi-commercial companies in China, we see state-owned actors, and we see military and national missions, right? So there's a set of Chinese space activities that are growing. And of course, we have the already extant US operators and continued growth there. So as operators in both countries deploy an increasing amount of spacecraft, the potential and the actual physical interaction between those spacecraft and between those space objects is also increasing. This creates an operational need for some level of operator-to-operator coordination or information exchange for the purposes of space safety between the US and Chinese space operator communities. But our ability and the potential to actually do that is significantly hampered by a number of geopolitical, competitive, and basically information availability challenges. So here in this panel, we want to discuss the need for that operational exchange, look at some of those barriers, and discuss prospects for moving forward. So I want to introduce our four panelists. To my immediate left is Siamak Hisar, who is the co-founder and CTO of Keihan Space. To his left is Audrey Schaefer, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Policy at Slingshot Aerospace, but is on this panel today in her capacity as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations Task Force on Securing Space, and I think Audrey will tell us a little bit more about what that is. And to Audrey's left is Joseph Kohler, the Head of Space Safety and Sustainability for Amazon Kuiper. And then we're also joined online virtually by Kristen Burke, who is the Senior Space and Counterspace Researcher at the China Aerospace Studies Institute. And we'll also have another video remark kind of midway through the panel from a colleague in China. So I want to start with turning to Siamak and see if we can take an overview of the space safety challenge that we are dealing with here. Can you give us a data-driven perspective on the current level of physical interaction we're seeing between US and Chinese space objects and what that might look like going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. I appreciate it, the opportunity to discuss about this important topic. So is the slides up on the screen?
Get the slides on the screen.
Can we get
there?
Okay, awesome. So I mean, as we heard in the keynote speech earlier, and I'm sure you all are aware of this, the increasing activities of the Chinese operators in the space. It's a big country, it's a lot of ambition, so there's definitely a lot of activities in space. So, and we talk about these challenges. So my thought was to basically put some numbers on those challenges. I'm going to go through very quickly through some slides, kind of in a number-driven, quantitative way of kind of bringing those challenges to the table and kind of set the stage for this discussion. So with that, okay, it works. So just looking at the current Chinese activities, this is number of launches that the Chinese have been performing since the early days. And as you see, there's a super exponential growth in the number of launches. And this year is already, we are in September, 3/4 of the way, and there's about 50-some launches. And I think they are set to break a record again. So they're racing, very fast forward to launch and to deploy their satellites, whether commercial or state-sponsored. In terms of the current Chinese activities, what is out there is it's a bit more than 800 satellites in orbit right now. that are operational. So these are only operational satellites that I'll be talking about in this context. Obviously, we all know there are, ASAT tests have been done, and there is, Fengyan 1C debris that we are all dealing with, but those are not the topic of this discussion. When it comes to coordination between operators, we are focusing on operators and operational satellites. So, and obviously more than 80% of that in the LEO environment. The table on the bottom of the slide shows the largest Chinese operators in terms of the number of operational satellites that they have. And the plot on the right side of the slide shows, based on the breakdown of the altitude and the number of those kind of distribution of those objects in orbit. And as you can see that they are overlapping with multiple shells of Starlink, current and future, as well as the future Kuiper shells and OneWeb and such. So that gives you a picture of what is going on now. So what is a concern? So obviously to the extent of this conversation and the work that we do in terms of spaceflight safety, that is a big concern, right? So we did a quick analysis just for the month of August. If we take the TLEs and consider any conjunction less than 5 kilometers. We all know TLEs are not very accurate for operational purpose, but for this purpose, I think it serves the objective. So we are on the order of more than 380,000 conjunction between operational, those 800 operational Chinese satellites, and other operational non-Chinese satellites. Again, I'm emphasizing an operational piece. And obviously, I asked my colleague to run the same analysis with 25 kilometers, and that brings that number to way above 1 million conjunctions just for 1 month. And in recent Starlink FCC filing, which is public, they have reported on the order of 144,000 collision avoidance maneuvers between their Gen 1 and Gen 2 constellation. That is on the order of 40 cola maneuvers per satellite per year that they are performing to avoid specifically the majority of that Chinese operational satellites. One of the biggest concern is, conjunctions are there. There are a lot of conjunctions and happening, and we need to deal with it. But the biggest concern here is the fact that the operators do not report their maneuvers or their the predicted maneuvers that they are planning to perform in the future, that there is no visibility, and that can cause a lot of challenges, obviously in the risk in terms of, false positive and most importantly, false negative conjunctions, right? So, and, challenges to tracking systems that they cannot maintain custody because they expect to see a particular object, but they maneuvered, so they are out of their field of view. And as the speaker at the keynote mentioned, just wanted to, in this slide, I wanted to take a kind of a different view of the Chinese activities. And as you mentioned earlier, the Chinese ecosystem, we are looking at the whole ecosystem and the country as one. But actually, there is a significant amount of activity. I did some research. This is a plot from a chart from Space Insider. The goal here is not for you to see the logos. The reason I put it up here just to show that the number of space-related activities and companies, obviously, whether they are state-sponsored or not, or pseudo commercial, there is a significant amount of activity going on. $300 billion, obviously accurate numbers are very hard to find, but current market estimates with a compound annual growth rate of about 10% in the next few years, it's expected to get to $900 billion by 2030. And we all know that the Chinese military is spending a lot of their budget on the space activities. So this is not going to slow down, and it is going to accelerate. So a look at the future. So in the terms of the expansion of the Chinese large constellations, we have these 2 large constellations north of 10,000 satellite each by 2030. And as you can see, this is a chart, again, very similar to the earlier chart that I showed, in terms of the distribution versus altitude and the number of satellites. However, in this chart, this looks at the planned deployment of the constellation. And it's a little bit hard to see, I apologize, but you can see that those colors are basically right on top of each other. We are going to have a scenario in the in the coming years that the large constellation from the Chinese is right on top of or in between the Starlink, Kuiper, OneWeb constellation. Obviously, they are there. It's not we can there's no law against it, but that's a reality, and we need to have a discussion about that. So then what do we do about it? So that's I guess the question that we want to answer in this panel.
Thank you, Siamak. And yeah, I think even that maybe you couldn't see the distinctions between the U.S. and Chinese operators on that chart maybe tells the story in and of itself, right? That they are right there in very similar regimes. I want to turn now to our operator, to Joseph. So as Kuiper deploys your constellation, how does the operational reality that you're seeing align with the data picture that Siamak just presented? And how would you characterize your current interactions or not with Chinese operators?
All right. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on this panel. Good morning to you. Good morning to all. I want to give a example and answer the question, also going back to what Artie said earlier about information and data sharing, that this has become critically more and more important. And I want to give an example. Before we started deploying our satellites, we have done a little exercise. And we have looked at how many payloads or how many operational satellites are moving through our projected orbit altitudes and orbits. And we identified a little bit over 1,500, so a little bit over 1,500 operational satellites. And we did the exercise, and we're trying to figure out, can we identify contact information for them? So we went to SpaceTrack, and we sorted through all the list. And now guess how many satellites actually have a contact information listed or an ownership even listed? Only about half of them. So about 800 operational satellites, we have no way of reaching out to them if we wanted to coordinate and exchange maneuver plans or those kind of things. And to me, that's just not a very safe environment. So because we're approaching this from a perspective of mutual respect. We want to reach out to the other operator. We want to coordinate with them. We want to see, exchange information about maneuverability, because every system has a different type of maneuverability and noise associated with that maneuver planning and so forth. So we wanted to approach everybody with a sense of mutual respect and give other operators also an opportunity to say, no, I will take that maneuver and you don't have to, right, and coordinate that. So out of those 1,500, 800 operational payloads, we send emails to the owners. So some owners, of course, have multiple satellites. Now imagine how many, and we explained in our email our deployment plans, a little bit of the timeline, and where they can reach out to us in case they have any questions or want to exchange some maneuver plans, those kind of things. And also explaining to them, if we don't hear from you, we will assume maneuver responsibility. Now imagine how many people or how many operators wrote back. 8. So what I'm trying to say with this example here, this is an environment that has worked so far, but countries and companies and operators always go back to equal access to space. And it's wonderful to be here at this conference because it's a mix of policymakers, stakeholders, and technical experts. And so, for example, one piece of technical work I wanted to highlight here is you can actually operate in very similar operational shells as a constellation. It's called with frozen orbits, and you can create nested shells that are very similar orbits, but you can avoid and minimize the conjunction between those two constellations. But it requires some sense of coordination and exchanging information with each other. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of room in space to deploy constellations. And when it comes to China, we're of course watching it very carefully because of that communication issue that we have about their deployment plans. And lo and behold, of course, they have issued plans or filed with the ITU planning to go into the exact same altitude with the same inclination. So it is doable, right? Again, going back to frozen orbit and nested shells concept to minimize the conjunction between those two, but we need to have an exchange of information with the other operator. I think that's critically important. There's lots of opportunity still to operate in space. There's lots of room left. I think we're falling a little bit to the victim of ourselves that space is congested. And the reason I'm saying this is because we're not exchanging contact information, maneuver plans, ephemeris, and so forth. So we can move beyond and enable the next space economy, the next wave of space economy, by doing very simple things, which are, again, like Artie said, exchanging simple things like contact information, maneuver plans, and so forth. And again, when it comes to China, our experience has been, given the political situation between those two countries, or our two countries, it's very difficult to go a government-to-government route, okay? So, but there is no more time left. We are deploying right now. So the only alternative is that we have to take things into our own hand, which is not ideal. But there's a lot of government-to-government conversation that still should happen, but my experience is that Chinese operators are actually equally interested in talking to us, which is not the perception I often get when talking to policymakers and at the political level. But Chinese operators realize that as well. They have to coordinate with us too in order to enable their deployment of their constellations. So I think there is mutual interest at the operator and operator level. We've reached out to a number of them, gotten some positive feedback, and we're working on that as we go forward, because I think that's the way we can actually enable that equal access to space that everybody talks about.
Thank you, Joseph. I think we'll come back here to the role of government with there is this real near-term imperative here. But I want to now turn to Kristen, who is joining us online. One of the challenges, and Joseph actually mentioned it, is simply, one of the challenges here is simply the availability of information, right? So the U.S. makes basic space safety information publicly available through SpaceTrack, through SpaceTrack, and ultimately through TRAX. While that's true, we know less about what Chinese SSA capabilities and their information sharing practices are. So in your work at COSI, you've done a review of China's SSA-related capabilities. Can you give us an overview of what we know about the capabilities in that ecosystem?
Well, thank you for letting me participate remotely. As you said, Ian, everything I'm going to say today is publicly available information, and you can find most of it on the Air University website, CASI portal, under the Space Research Area. So to the question of the availability of China's spaceflight safety information, I would say the availability and the types of spaceflight safety information are in some ways similar to that of the United States, and in other ways different. The way in which it's similar is if we can describe spacetrack.org as a US military website, which you must log into with authentic credentials. And if you want better data, such as ephemeris, as a satellite operator, you need to usually provide additional information as well. So we could say, at least currently, yes, eventually TRAX will make it a Department of Commerce website. But currently, and up until now, it is a US military website that has a need-to-know threshold built in, basically. And so in that way, China has that information. I bump into Chinese government websites all the time that have a login button, and I don't click it. And so the familiarity with the language and the willingness to create an account and to log in is something I don't know if anyone of the operators has ever tried. So that's something worth exploring. There are many ways in which the availability of their spaceflight safety information is different. The first thing is that they maintain a separate space object catalog. And that space object catalog isn't just what's available on spacetrack.org plus the satellites that they track that aren't publicly available. Their catalog is different because it's populated with their sensor data and because they don't have the access to a global ground-based radar network like we do. They take a very different approach to tracking satellites and scanning for debris in low Earth orbit. For example, they use many more space-based sensors than we do. So just imagine a ton of SBSSs. And when I'm talking about space-based sensors, I'm not talking about non-Earth imagery. This is separate from taking pictures of satellites to investigate the quality of their components. This is purely reflected light to do satellite catalog maintenance and collision avoidance. The other way that their separate catalog will be populated with different types of data is that they do more LEO tracking with ground-based optical than we do. So similar to Slingshot's uncued optical fence, kind of has something like that as well, it appears to me. And so with that different type of data in their separate catalog, which you might be able to get if you logged into a PLA website, that also means that they have a completely different conjunction warning collision avoidance system than we do. There are many patents available and additional information that describe their threshold of risk and how many days out when they will notify their operators. And so if and when you get a hold of a Chinese satellite operator, you will have different pictures of what the reality of the situation is. And that's something to be aware of and sensitive to in that engagement. It could lead to a lot of miscommunication, or it could be a really enriching experience. It could go either way. But those are the main ways in which I flag that it's different and the way in which it's similar. And that all is to say that it's available, but just not in the way we would prefer it.
So, thank you for that. So that's an interesting kind of mirroring, right? So I think we might think that on the Chinese side, it's the same challenge, right? If you want to go to spacetrack.org as a Chinese operator, other than the basic service, you're probably not going to want to access that, right? So I think some of this is this just kind of mirroring and a little bit of asymmetry there. So Audrey, we're beginning to get into the geopolitical aspect of this. So can't ignore that dimension here. You were a member of the CFR-facilitated task force on securing space, a plan for U.S. action. One of the recommendations out of that task force was essentially that even as we have this strategic level competition between the two states, the U.S. should also seek engagement with China on selected issues like space traffic management and spaceflight safety. Can you share some insights on why engagement in this area makes sense given the geopolitics?
Yes, thank you so much, Ian, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to showcase this report. So just a little bit of context. So the Council on Foreign Relations is a nonpartisan, independent national membership organization, think tank, educator, and publisher. If you're familiar with the Foreign Affairs magazine, this is put out by CFR. I am not employed by CFR. I have no formal affiliation with CFR. What CFR did was convene a task force of 23 experts in space, politics, and national security really from across the political spectrum. It was a very high-level group of individuals, including former members of Congress, a national security advisor, 2 former NASA administrators, a NOAA administrator, and leaders from academia and industry. And this group looked at, primarily from a US perspective, the growing challenges in space. And it was sort of a huge mandate. But one of the issues that we keyed in on really quickly was exactly what you are asking about, Ian, is kind of this dichotomy between the US needing to compete with China militarily and strategically at the same time that the US needs to engage with China on space traffic management and space safety issues. And I think for everyone in this room, the US interest is quite clear. We are very dependent on space for our national security and our economic prosperity, which incentivizes us not only to want to protect the specific assets that are up there and operating today, but really to protect the long-term sustainability of the environment so that we can continue benefiting from space in the years to come. And I mean, I think it's really as simple as that, but I introduced the kind of high level and broad nature of the group that came up with this recommendation just to make the point that this wasn't really just like space experts talking to themselves on the importance of this. This was really high level, former government officials who maybe never worked space in their career, but who really saw the value in this need for dialogue with the Chinese. And I thought, CMEC, I thought your slides were great in terms of showing the growth in Chinese activity and how it overlaps with US activity. So I would like to think that as the Chinese grow their presence in space exponentially, they will see the same kind of self-interest that we do in this need for engagement. And in fact, I think, Joseph, that was reflected in your remarks talking about the demand you see at the operational level to engage with other operational counterparts. But as you mentioned, Ian, I mean, geopolitics is certainly a factor here, and we have seen some reluctance at the government level on the Chinese side, which I know we'll talk about a little later, to really get into this kind of dialogue. But in my opinion, we really can't wait. If you look at other domains, the air domain, we had unfortunately to have a series of incidents or accidents that really led towards the development of these more cooperative frameworks for engagement. And I really hope that we don't have to wait for something like that in order to set up a system of communication and normative practices.
Thank you, Audrey. And I think we can say that China also relies on space for economic prosperity and national security, right? So you would think that that alignment would potentially exist. And that's from a diplomatic and international politics standpoint, that's the kind of alignment that we need to see if we can develop, right? Yeah.
That's right. And actually, if I could just make sort of one more quick point, I think one of the issues we've had is this kind of commingling sometimes of space safety and space security. And I think the more we're able to sort of disentangle those, the Chinese may not think it's in their interest to talk to the U.S. about space security, but hopefully they will start to realize that it is absolutely in their interest to talk about space safety.
All right, so now I want to do something a little different. We did want to make sure to include a perspective from someone in the Chinese ecosystem in this conversation, right? Because we're talking about a problem that is a shared problem and a bilateral discussion. So we have a pre-recorded short video from one of the Chinese commercial operators. I want to thank Zhang Peng, who is the Director of Solutions at Galaxy Space, for his willingness to provide us this video. And we basically asked him to just share his perspectives as an emerging operator in China about what space safety means to them and how they engage with the ecosystem there. So if we could play the video from Galaxy Space now, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Zhang Peng from Galaxy Space, which is a startup company in the commercial space and satellite land. We specialize in LEO satellite design, manufacture, and operation. With an increasing number of commercial satellites being launched, the need for effective space traffic coordination, especially between US and China, these two most prolific space actors, is becoming more critical than ever before. First, let's take a look at the challenges. One of the most pressing challenges is orbital congestion, particularly in LEO orbit. Commercial space companies have launched thousands of new satellites over the past few years and plan to launch tens of thousands more. The LEO region is becoming increasingly crowded, and the risk of collision increases. These collisions have the potential to cause chain reactions, making the orbital environment more dangerous for future missions. On the other hand, there is no global binding regulatory system in place yet, making it challenging for commercial companies to comply with diverse regulations and coordinated actions globally. As we all know, effective space traffic coordination relies on accurate and real-time tracking of objects in space. However, tracking smaller objects like defunct satellites and space debris remains difficult. Insufficient monitoring may lead to missed warning of the potential collision. From a technical perspective, more and more electrical thrusters were used in LEO satellites, making the trajectory prediction of the space objects and the timely avoidance maneuver more difficult. Despite these challenges, there are also numerous opportunities for commercial space. Generally speaking, there is a growing recognition of the need for international collaboration in space traffic coordination. By working together, different satellite operators can create more efficient and standardized processes for space traffic management, improving safety for all operators. Emerging techniques such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced sensors can improve the accuracy and efficiency of space traffic management. These technologies can help predict potential collisions and recommend timely maneuvers to prevent accidents. Governments and private space companies can work together to enhance space situational awareness and create better infrastructure for space traffic coordination. Through partnerships, private companies could gain access to government-funded monitoring systems, also can contribute to the system. Finally, the space traffic coordination opens the door to new business opportunities. Commercial companies can provide services related to space situational awareness, including original data based on ground or space-based infrastructure, or satellite collision warning and avoidance strategy services. In past 5 years, we have launched 34 satellites and managed them using 57 cooperative stations. Over 800 maneuvers were performed in 2024. In our company, we have established a communication and disposal mechanism with China National Space Administration, with a collision warning response time of less than 5 hours. My colleague will submit satellite information once launched and synchronize the precise infirmaries routinely after orbit delimitation and before maneuver. While the center will conduct the collision risk assessment based on the catalog of the space objects and our satellite infirmaries. In our company, the satellite performs autonomous orbit delimitation and generates orbit control strategies more than 24 hours in advance. When the orbit control is performed under the condition that the collision analysis from the ground confirms safety. In the event of collision risk, the ground will stop the satellite's orbit control operations. The risk of collision is a statistical probability. The close approaches are inevitable. However, there are no direct channels between US-China satellite operators. Any communication is informal, happening through back channels at conferences or at multilateral bodies like the UNOSA. Quite inefficient. So, what's the prospect for change? On one hand, the obstacles are significant. In certain occasions, SSA data is treated as a state secret asset, not a shared resource. Concerns about data accuracy and fears that it could be cut off in the crisis create a verification problem, and the lack of legal frameworks leaves open thorny questions about liability. On the other hand, the mutual self-interest in preventing a catastrophic debris event is powerful and motivator, and the technical Solutions like standardized data formats already exist and are used in industries. As space sustainability becomes a higher priority, commercial space operators can be incentivized to adopt best practices for debris mitigation, collision avoidance, and end-of-life disposal of satellites. This could create a more sustainable and safer space environment for all. To conclude, we must recognize that a formal data sharing agreement is a distant goal. The pragmatic path forward is to pursue gradual steps. We recommend a three-point approach. First, encourage experts and formal officials from both countries to explore fundamental issues such as technical standards, data formats, and operational procedures through academic forums. Second, establish a dedicated channel or platform for accessing data at urgent conjunction warnings. Third, leverage multilateral forums like the UN to develop neutral global guidelines, which can provide a buffer for bilateral talks. Thank you, and look forward to a transparent data sharing system.
All right, well, I know Zhongbing is not with us live, I don't think, because I think it's about 3 in the morning in Beijing right now, so, or probably something worse. So just I want to thank him for his contribution to this. I think it's emblematic of the need to have these conversations and to learn to see what the perspectives of operators in both countries have. So, Joseph, having just heard that perspective from Galaxy Space, and you've had other interactions, let's talk practicalities, right? What information should we be coordinating? Should we be sharing? And what would that process look like with your Chinese counterparts, in your view?
Right. I think the message that we heard is actually a really encouraging one. I think there is a fundamental recognition between operators about the internal incentives that we have as commercial operators, which is to protect and assure the long term of our operations, right? For example, for Amazon Kuiper, we're investing a large amount of money into building a long-term infrastructure, and we cannot afford to leave debris behind within our own operational orbit. So it behooves us, and it has become one of our anchor tenants, to operate safely. And I see that reflected in his message as well, in particular the incentive, the internal incentive of a commercial operator, which actually is, I think, should be an important takeaway from this conversation here, because there is a misperception out there that increasing commercial activities cause increasing space debris. And I think Artie mentioned that as well. And it could be further from the truth, right? There was a paper published in earlier this year at the European Space Debris Conference in Europe that found that if you look at all the debris that's currently out there and attribute it to where does it actually come from, the paper described and found that 94% of that space debris that's currently out there is actually from anti-satellite testing, old legacy governmental systems. Only 6% is from commercial activity, right? And if you look at the history, another example is that the way you can look at it is NASA is publishing every quarter the new numbers of operational payloads, space debris, rocket bodies, right? It's a history, a time history diagram. And you can see, yeah, the operations are increasing, right? There's this exponential curve that everybody is referring to. But if you look at the amount of space debris, that's actually fairly flat since 2010, right? And so that actually tells me that the best practices that we have developed over the last 10 years or 20 years have a real effect on ensuring that long-term sustainability of outer space operations, right? It's these, the tremendous experiences that government operations have gained in the very early space age we're able to take that today and have implemented that and enable operations that are much safer. Right, we've learned how to build better battery designs and how to operate, to do disposal and those kind of things. So these all have real effect. And I want to dispel that myth out there that increasing commercial activities cause more space debris. I think the data does not support that today, and we can actually see that. So I think in conclusion, there is a lot of commonality, and I think in that message. And because of that mutual interest, and I mentioned that earlier, and the easiest things to move forward and enable that next wave of space economy is to do very simple things like just information sharing, contact information sharing, ephemeris sharing, maneuver plan sharing, those kind of things. Those are technically informed and have a real effect on the long-term sustainability of operations. And I think that is today what's holding us back from that conversation of being congested. If we share more information, I think we can go beyond being congested.
Okay. So we have about 20 minutes left, but before I move forward, just wanted to see if Audrey, Kristen, or CMAC had any thoughts based on what either Joseph or Zhongpeng has just said. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I agree with everything Joseph said. The encouraging, kind of message that we just heard, and we have heard this before as well, that there is, and I believe the gentleman used the common interest or self-interest. The Chinese operators are recognizing, and rightly so, that it is in their self-interest, and it's a common interest for everyone to be able to establish better and more efficient communication channels with other operators, and to be able to grow their constellations and the way that they're planning to grow.
Maybe, Ian, sorry, just to put it really simply, it's not rocket science, it's just diplomacy, actually. That's the hard part here. But we can get to more of that. I know you have some more questions on that later.
So we can debate maybe a panel for next year whether what's more difficult, rocket science or diplomacy. But Kristen, I don't know if there's anything you want to add at this point. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn now. Okay. So we're here at a technical conference. We're at an SSA conference where basically everybody that does commercial SSA is in this hotel, right? Including two folks right here next to me. CMAC, I just wanted to ask, what does the commercial SSA ecosystem, what capabilities and approaches can we bring to bear from this innovative world to this challenge?
How much time do we have?
17 minutes, but we want to get the audience questions.
Yeah. No, I mean, commercial industry, I mean, and that's a theme here, right? And I'm sure you're noticing that the commercial industry has tremendous responsibility and also tremendous opportunity to bridge the gap. When we start talking about, and the reason we have this conversation right now is because communication between the government at the government level has not worked. Has not worked at the level that it allows for efficient, light speed communication between different operators that we require today. And when you bring governments and the conversation is at the government level, it already presumes a national security aspect, right? So there's that national security presumption, and I think Audrey, you pointed out a really important point that we need to, as a commercial SSA industry, we need to try to segregate or separate the national security and space domain awareness activities from spaceflight safety. They are very different activity sets, and they require very different capabilities. And it is, Chinese operators are also, I think, recognizing that. So, I mean, in terms of the list of things that commercial industry can do, obviously, and the gentleman, in the video discussed the track 2 kind of conversation, kind of bridging the gap. But more specifically, I think having a dialogue together to establish rules of the road, right? So the norms. We have here in the U.S. and there's other, obviously, other countries have commercial companies have are signatories to Space Safety Coalition best practices. We are signatories of it as well, and I know Slingshot and others. So I think those kind of industry-led activities that basically sets up these best practices, and I think that's the best way to start instead of coming down with a very heavy-handed regulation. Starting from grassroots, starting from the industry to start putting together the regulations and or standards rather to establish the rules of the road between different operators. But also, data sharing, transparency, as I said in my earlier presentation, not sharing maneuver plans or predicted maneuver plans is a big problem, and that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure the Chinese operators have the same interest in knowing where the Kuiper satellite or Starlink satellite is going to move in the future. That is not reflected in neither Chinese catalog or the U.S. catalog. But then there's another piece that I think the commercial industry can really play a good role, and that is, a famous U.S. president once said, "Trust but verify." So I think that is also can be a role for the commercial industry to hold itself accountable.
And if I could add, Ian, at the risk of the policy person talking about technical capabilities, I mean, I think the one thing that I didn't hear, but I think you would agree with, is we have the ability to bring together disparate data sources, compare them, fuse them, make operational recommendations, and actually to solve this exact problem. I mean, in fact, Slingshot's beacon platform was designed expressly to enable operator-to-operator coordination on space traffic management. I mean, if you're on the platform, you can upload your ephemerides, you can send us your maneuver plans, and that gets incorporated into the platform that does, conjunction warnings and shares that with other operators who might be affected and provides mechanisms for communicating. But unfortunately, it requires operators to actually all be kind of on the same platform, which gets to the part of our discussion about, you got to show up. And so the challenge here, again, it's not the rocket science, or in this case, the data science or the astrodynamics. The challenge is the diplomatic one of how do you get everybody to show up? Maybe not on a single platform, but in a system of systems that is designed to cooperate and coordinate.
Well, let's hold that for just a minute, because I do want that we do have more questions around what you're just raising about how you actually get this done. But Kristen, I want to quickly just come back to you. So we're talking about the commercial SSA ecosystem, and we have the U.S. commercial SSA ecosystem here, a good number of our allies and their commercial companies here. Have you, in your research, seen any Chinese commercial or private SSA firms? I can't think of one, but I'm not sure if you found one or not.
Yes, Ian. I found at least one Chinese commercial SSA company. It owns its own ground and space-based sensor network to provide satellite tracking and conjunction early warnings. It plans to have 30 ground-based stations, like the optical uncued fence like I discussed earlier, as well as 108 satellites, different types of SSA satellites. The first of that 108 was launched on the 5th of this month on one of Zhang Peng's rockets. The company's name is Beijing Kaiyun United, that's Kaiyun, and its partner who will operate the Aerospace Trusted Data Operations Center is called Guoheng, that's Guoheng. And don't worry, I've got a paper coming out in a couple of days that's going to explain it in much more detail.
Interesting.
The important point is that they are doing both have their own sensors and tracking, as well as providing analytics. And so their website is spacemapper.cn, and you can see their services and their finished reports, one of which is relevant to this panel. It's a 3-day review from August of Kuiper satellites that went over Beijing for a 3-day period. So there you go. That's available on the website with just one click. And the question is this the company that a US satellite operator would want to reach out to? And I think the answer to that, they won't put you in contact with a Chinese satellite operator, but if you want to notify someone that is aggregating all of China's data to provide the satellite warning that I talked about them having separate from ours, if you want to tell them, hey, I plan to move, they can update their algorithm, and then their operators will be notified through the automated system that they have.
So there, yeah. Thank you. So it's both a, another point of contact with to learn a little bit more, but actually maybe a little bit of an operational level there. So, all right, we've got 10 minutes left, and we've got a lot of questions here. So we're going to try to solve the diplomatic challenges in lightning round format. So, Audrey, you were talking about the importance of actually having these conversations and making those dialogues move forward. There's a couple of questions here about how we do that. So. Zhangpeng, Joseph, you've both mentioned you're willing to talk to other operators, right? You're willing to have these conversations. One of our audience members says, traditionally operators maybe have been nervous to talk to the Chinese or for the Chinese to talk directly in a bilateral context to the Americans. So I think the question is here, how do we start taking more systematic, practical steps towards these dialogues? And I'd just be curious from all four of our panelists to your perspectives on that. Yeah.
I'll start because this has been a huge challenge in the bilateral relationship. I mean, I used to work in the US government for a really long time, and I can't even tell you the number of times or forums or meetings that I've been in where we have either actually engaged with the Chinese and they were unwilling to talk about this issue, or we have tried to engage the Chinese and they were unwilling to even have the meeting. I mean, it has been stymied for over a decade, and there are broader geopolitical issues at play here that really have nothing to do with space safety that are preventing those bilateral dialogues from going forward. So to get to your question, Ian, of what can we do practically to sort of break through this impasse, I mean, I think the answer actually is pretty clear and has kind of been alluded to throughout our conversation. I mean, first, I'm really heartened to hear the work that's being done at the operational level between operators to start to build that connective tissue, because I think in the end, that's actually one of the most important elements that we need is just operators talking to operators. But I also do believe that you need to have some level of government-to-government engagement, both because, at the end of the day, if you want to have a global space traffic management or coordination system, you're going to need governments to be kind of the shepherds of that system, and they need to coordinate with one another. But also at a more practical level, at least in my experience dealing with the Chinese, they want the government to have a fairly heavy hand in overseeing their national actors in space, their private sector. They don't really like their companies necessarily going to see the US barbarians, if you will. So they're going to want to play a role. And that's why we have to create this diplomatic space for those discussions. And I think in Artie's keynote, she talked about this expert group that has just been created in UN COPUOS. And I actually have a great deal of hope that that can be a forum through which this government-to-government discussion can happen. And I think it was on Zhang's slide, he had the word, a buffer, to be a buffer, to have a conversation in a multilateral forum. Now, just to conclude, and I know, diplomacy is not done in lightning talks, Ian, but
yeah, I know.
it will take time, right? You're not going to get an outcome from the UN in 6 months or even 2 years. It will probably take 5 to maybe even 10 years. So we cannot wait for that to continue these operational conversations. And in fact, these operational conversations, as they mature, will inform what the UN agrees to and make it more grounded in best practices.
Did Audrey solve that for the other three of you?
2 minutes or less, Ian.
Yeah. Kristen, did you? Yeah. Cannot hear you. Yeah.
Hear me now?
There we are. Yeah.
I wanted to add to what Audrey said. I believe that, as we were talking about before, the need to separate the space security from the space flight safety channels, that has happened in the past. The Chinese in their space activities white paper will describe different engagements that they've had with the United States, one of which is the US-China Civil Space Dialogue, and then they also describe the debris technical expert exchanges and the spaceflight safety technical expert exchanges that we've had. So those are different dialogues than the ones where Audrey's engaging, primarily on security DoD-directed chats. And in those human spaceflight safety and debris-focused dialogues, I've been able to participate in those as a supporter of those of the policymakers who are going to make the decisions and listen to those. And in those talks, the Chinese come full force. They bring anybody they bring the counterpart of whoever we bring. And so it's a very good way to get access to a large body of Chinese participants who have a direct role in managing spaceflight safety. And the benefit of doing that is all of the participants hear updates from all the other participants, and at the same time, that helps us to have better internal coordination because we've all heard the same thing at the same time. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Can I add one really quick point,
Yeah.
Ian? Just really quick. So, I know the conversation here is really focused on U.S.-China, but I thought the statistics that Joseph offered in his opening remarks about the number of satellites that Kuiper is going to have potential conjunctions with, the contact information they found, and then the number of people that actually responded to their email was striking. And the point I just want to make is the other benefit of these multilateral forums is this isn't just a U.S.-China conversation anymore. I mean, I don't know the statistics. You should filter one more time on what were the nationalities of those of the satellite operators, because we need to get all countries who are authorizing and supervising space activities to be participating in these discussions and either encouraging or in fact requiring their operators to respond to emails like the ones that Joseph sent.
So we could say there's a general coordination challenge and gap, and then U.S.-China adds a specific layer of extra to that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really hinges on, we're approaching this topic from a lens of mutual respect and trust, right? And that's something that we need to build. We actually were quite successful in building that mutual respect and trust with our competition in the United States. We work very closely on space safety aspects with our partners at SpaceX, right, and Starlink, because equally they recognize the importance of that. And it even went so far that when we're maneuvering our satellites through their constellation, which is quite a tricky process to do, we shared our algorithms with them, and they reviewed our algorithm and said, okay, this looks good, and we proceeded. And we have successfully moved now. I forgot how many we already moved through their shell, but it's actually a really successful process. And I think this highlights that from a perspective of mutual trust and respect, you can use those as your foundation to build a safer environment. And we're doing that successfully with our fiercest competitors. And I think we need to make progress with other countries as well, and other Chinese operators as well. And I think that's an approach I think that will work.
For a quick statement.
Yeah, very quick, just to go back to going back to what Joseph said earlier in terms of half of the operators not having the contact information. That is one of the roles that I see the commercial industry can play really well. And that's why on the KAON side we have our platform SatCat. We have started basically the largest I can tell is the operator directory that we have gone and done a sweep of all the publicly available information about all the operators out there, and then have people actually going manually and verifying that information. And we encourage operators to go and claim their pages, and if there's any inaccuracy but obviously we have gotten that from publicly available information, and they're not always real time. So I think this transparency and bringing the data to the view of everyone is very important.
All right. So just real quick with the two questions, yes, no answer. One for Joseph. It has been pointed out that spacetrack.org allows you to share CDMs, and Chinese can, of course, look at that if they would want to, I think through the basic level. Are operators willing to share CDMs through spacetrack.org or other platforms? The audience question.
So, yes, we're sharing our ephemeris with spacecraft.org.
All right.
Oh, CDMs.
Yeah.
Well, CDMs are not generated at the operator level, right? So we need maneuver screening for that. So that's produced by somebody else. Again, going back to, sorry for not a yes/no answer. We're actually working very closely with SpaceX on that topic too, right? Where we upload our ephemeris and they do maneuver screening for us, right? And then we can decide maneuver or not maneuver.
All right, and the last one I'm going to put Audrey on the spot for, and I think it's important to raise this issue. It's an audience question. Is it time to rescind the Wolf Amendment? Wolf Amendment limits U.S. bilateral, NASA specifically, Office of Science and Technology Policy bilateral interactions. It's not directly related to space safety. But
I refuse to give a yes/no answer to that question. So for those of you who don't know, the Wolf Amendment, it doesn't technically restrict U.S.-China cooperation on space, but what it does is it requires NASA and certain offices in the White House to essentially notify Congress and screen the Chinese interlocutors for potential human rights violations. And when that law was put into place, it was really more about actually punishing China for human rights abuses than it was about restricting space cooperation. And what it's done over the past several years is not only created an irritant in the bilateral relationship, but it's actually incentivized China to develop some of its own space capabilities. And so I think I will just leave my answer there.
Yeah. All right, and with that, thank you, Audrey, for taking that one as the last one.
I want for the team, Ian.
Yeah, I want to thank the four panelists plus Ms. Zhang Hong for participating in this. Sorry we did not get to all the audience questions, but I think we've explored the complexities of this issue and developed a few ideas forward, and this conversation will continue. So thank you to the audience. Thank you to the panelists.